Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, good evening, friends, and welcome to this March 19, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Tonight in the news, friends, I'm going to open with a story from a couple of days ago on the 17th of March, when the Navy SEALs took control of a rogue Libyan oil tanker. I'm starting with this story because the other day we read you some news out of Russia, a GRU report circulating in the Kremlin that has information saying that the U.S. Navy diverted the missing Malaysian flight MH370 to a remote secret island in the Indian Ocean on the Diego Garcia Atoll. And just to show you how good the U.S. Navy is at taking control of vessels, let's take a look at this story from a couple of days ago when the U.S. took control of a tanker full of oil loaded from a rebel-held port in Libya, according to the Pentagon.
The Pentagon says that U.S. Navy SEALs boarded and seized the oil vessel that was carrying an illegal shipment of crude oil from Libya. They seized it from the Mediterranean Sea, and at the time it was docked just off the island of Cyprus. Libyan authorities have confirmed that they requested the help of the U.S. government to retrieve the oil back to Libya. It's believed that U.S. sailors will now be guiding the ship back to Libyan shores. It's unclear at this stage where it will be docking. Now, this latest development is likely to act as a deterrent for any future illegal oil sales from Libya. It sends a clear message to anyone trying to buy oil from the armed groups that are blockading the oil ports in the east that it will not be an easy task.
And friends, that was Rana Jawad reporting. And let me give you a couple of notes I have on this. The raid by the Navy SEALs took place in international waters south of Cyprus, said Rear Admiral John Kirby. The Morning Glory's evasion of a naval blockade at the eastern port of Sidra prompted Libya's parliament to sack Prime Minister Ali Zaidan last week. And then you heard the rest of the report with BBC's Rana Jawad. Now, friends, I've got another report that I believe you'll find interesting. The UN report on North Korea finds atrocities like World War II style.
The journey from North Korea to the United Nations in Geneva has been long and difficult. Kim Jong-il can't forget the regime he escaped from 17 years ago, a regime which the UN investigation claims uses terror, violence and starvation to control its people.
Our family had a bit of corn because my mother had a small business, but my friend's family lived off acorns. My friend in high school died of starvation. I watched him die.
Deliberate famine is just one chilling allegation in the 400-page investigation. There are also horrific details of prison camps, even drawings made by former prisoners, of the living lying with the dead, and inmates forced to eat snakes and rats to survive. The investigators believe the UN must act.
Too many times in this building there are reports and no action. Well, this is a time for action. We can't say we didn't know. We now all do know. Anyone who wants to know can read the report.
The report recommends sanctions against North Korea's leaders, even referral to the International Criminal Court. The North Korean defectors who have travelled to Geneva are pinning their hopes on action from the UN Human Rights Council.
There's no chance of change with the current regime. but I have faith in the UN to put pressure on. Eventually the current system will collapse. The government has to change. We need a new system.
Those hopes may be disappointed. The Human Rights Council can advise, but only the UN Security Council can refer North Korea to the International Criminal Court. There, China, which says it prefers dialogue to sanctions, has a veto. So today, the world's top human rights body will have to consider what it can possibly do about one of the most detailed accounts of atrocities ever produced. Atrocities which, the victims hope, surely cannot be ignored. Imogen Folks, BBC News, Geneva.
Okay, and thank you, Imogen Folks with the BBC. And friends, the BBC has a couple of more very interesting stories we're going to play tonight. That one we just played, though, the UN Human Rights Council is discussing a report on human rights violations in North Korea. The authors say the infringements resemble the worst atrocities of World War II and suggest North Korea should be referred to the International Criminal Court. It's interesting, friends, is it not, how many stories of late have been coming up that relate to either World War II or World War I. There have been a lot of bombs exploding that go all the way back to 1914, World War I time. And I may have some stories on that for you in tomorrow night's report. But in this last story, a number of people who managed to escape from North Korea traveled to Geneva for the meeting that you heard Imogen Folks reporting on in the video we just played. Now, friends, in this next story, it's a little bit lighter story. I don't know if you can see that in the background, but it's a photograph that was very popular around World War II time. It'll open up more fully when we play it. The U.S. Navy veteran who appeared in the iconic World War II kissing photo. He died on March 14. Now, today's March 19. He died 5 days ago. He was a Texas man thought to be the U.S. Navy sailor kissing a nurse in an iconic end of World War II photo. Glenn McDuffy died at age 86 at a nursing home in Dallas on Sunday, according to his daughter.
She was standing out there in the middle of the street, and she heard me. She turned around and did like that, and I went over. That's when I went over and kissed her.
And that's the famous photo, and that's a younger picture of Mr. McDuffie standing beside that photo. And friends, the man in that famed VJ Day, Victory Day photo was supported by a police forensic artist analyst, photographer Alfred Eisenstedt took the image of the news of Japan's surrender, filtered through New York Times Square on August 14, 1945. McDuffie had told U.S. media that he was changing subway trains when he heard that Japan had surrendered. He let out a big whoopee. Well, let's see, what does he say here? She said, Glenn McDuffie, she said she was standing out there in the middle of the street. I went over there and kissed her. I was so happy I ran out in the street, said McDuffie, who was then 18, and on his way to visit his girlfriend. And then he saw that nurse, he said. She saw me hollering, and with a big smile on my face, I just went right up to her. She threw her arms open, and I grabbed her and kissed her. Edith Shane, who worked in a nearby hospital, claimed to be the nurse in the photo. She died in 2010. And that relates back to World War II also, friends. And we're, as Herbert Armstrong well said many times, he said, friends, once World War began, it's not a different war when it goes from World War I to World War II, and it's not going to be a different World War when it goes to World War III. It's just a continuation where it's different rounds of the same war. And we're just in a recess right now between round 2 and round 3. Well, our next story relates to creation versus evolution. I'm going to put it that way because many of you who watch this program believe in the great Creator God, and even though many of you who watch this story understand that though many of the world's religions will try to tell you that the world was created 6,000 years ago, and those who say that, they misunderstand. There was a recreation 6,000 years ago, but it was a recreation upon the earth that had been made beautiful maybe even millions of years before that, or even trillions or billions of years before that. We don't know how long. God doesn't say, but he does say that the angels were created first, and then at some point in time, when God created time, the angels shouted for joy at the creation of the earth. So he didn't create it tohu and bohu. He didn't create it in the condition we find it in Genesis 1:1. He created it in the condition of Job 14, I believe it is, where the angels shouted for joy. And maybe it's Job 32. Next time I talk about it, I'll look that up. But you can do your electronic concordance on it and find the verse where the angels shouted for joy when God created the earth. That tells you he didn't create it in the condition of Genesis 1:1, between 1:1 and 1:2, where it became tohu and bohu, and God had to come down and clean up the earth. And he didn't create it with water flooding the earth. That was because of Satan's attempt to go up to God's throne and take over God's throne, and be then thrown back down to this earth with the third of the angels that were under him, that went up with him to do battle at God's throne in an effort to try to take over God's throne. You know, we see governments in this world doing world war to try to rule the world and take over the rule of the whole world. And yet Satan went up. He was the ruler of this world, but he wanted more than ruling this world. He wanted to rule the whole universe. He wanted to rule from God's throne. He went up and tried to take over God's throne, but God still had 2/3 of the angels faithful to him. God much more powerful than any angel anyway. God was able to throw Satan back down to this earth, and on the way, a lot of the planets were marred as that climatic battle rang throughout the universe. And you see the potholes and the craters on the moon because of the damage on the way back to this earth as God threw Satan back to this earth. And then when he was back on this earth, the condition of Satan trying to do battle with God left this earth in a unroyal mess, with water flooding it. So the first flood was not at the time of Noah. The first flood was at the time when Satan tried to take over God's throne, got thrown back down here on this earth, that Satan was the cause of it becoming an absolute chaotic, gas-filled, ruinous mess here on the earth, that God had to come down 6,000 years ago and refashion, reshape, recreate, clean it up. And in 6 days and 6 nights, he cleaned up the earth. He cleaned up the universe surrounding the earth. And he got things back in order, including the stars and the sun and the moon and things that cause orderliness to prevail around the earth and to cause beauty upon the earth. A beauty that God made, a kind of beauty that no man could create. Man only messes up the beauty that's been put here by God. But scientists say they have extraordinary new evidence to support a Big Bang theory for the origin of the universe. Now, you know, friends, in one way, because when you study how God did this, when you study, for example, I was talking with a friend today who was explaining to me his study about how a butterfly comes from this caterpillar that is just a wormy little mushy creature for a while, and yet God made it so that the butterfly evolves out of that caterpillar right before our eyes, as if it were. And the way that all of that works is such that, as even Darwin himself said, the odds for some of these things happening, some things cannot evolve. They have to all be in place at one time, or it doesn't work. So in one sense, when God originally created the earth, after having master planned it, it couldn't have banged together with the odds against the numbers for everything being programmed out the way it is without some wonderful mastermind behind it. And so once God had it all designed out on paper or in his computer, or however he did it, or in his own mind, his computer-like fabulous mind, better than any computer, once he had that all mapped out and how the DNA for this and that would work, he pushed the button like you do on your computer to start a program to work, and boom, it all comes into place and can happen. It could have happened like a big bang, but not the way it's taught in our universities and colleges, where it just happened without a God behind it. It happened in a wonderful, creative manner, such that the angels shouted for joy when God did that. Let's take a look, though, at some of the beauty that's been captured as a result of the work of these researchers who believe that they found the signal left in the sky by the super rapid expansion of space that they say must have occurred just fractions of a second after everything came into being. Now, if you've got any kind of well-working logical mind at all, you're going to say, well, that had to be the result of a great creator involved with it. And yet there are some who will try to accredit this to just something just happening out there by coincidence, But let's take a look at that video now. The BBC's science editor David Schuckman reports on this one.
These are ancient and incredibly challenging mysteries. How the universe started. What was it that allowed everything we're familiar with to be born? Questions which modern science has tried to answer with the idea of a Big Bang. It's the theory of a single burst of creation. And now, for the first time, there's proof of this process at work. A telescope under the freezing skies of the South Pole has detected clues about light from the very earliest moments of time. Applause today for a major advance. At Harvard University, the first results were unveiled, and this is a genuine breakthrough in understanding how it all began. For decades, the idea of a Big Bang giving birth to the universe has been a theory with no hard evidence of exactly how this worked. Now, this American team has discovered patterns in the energy left over from the very earliest moments. They spotted particular twists in the light that was created back then, patterns that can only have been formed by ripples radiating out from the initial burst of the Big Bang. And those ripples are what ultimately allowed gravity to pull together the galaxies, the stars, and the planets. So this is a major advance in understanding how we got here.
And then the bicep 2 cross Keck points.
Scientists all over the world have been poring over the results. This team gathered at Oxford University this afternoon. There's a recognition that this is a hugely important milestone.
We don't know why the universe started expanding. We don't know why the Big Bang happened. And this takes us as far back as now it's possible to go, and will hopefully help us figure that out.
So all this raises a tantalizing thought. If we can know how the Big Bang got going, can we also find out how it actually started? The big question about our own existence. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Thank you, David. Friends, tomorrow I plan on having a report for you about, it'll be a shocking report. I'm going to forewarn you ahead of time, so if this is something that might upset you, then maybe you won't want to tune in to tomorrow night's report, because I'm going to tell you about some reports that are out there that are encouraging the enemies of the United States to start blowing up cities in the United States, and even giving instruction on how to create the bombs to do it. And, you know, for those of us who live in the United States, that's not some real happy and encouraging news at all. But in preparation for that story tomorrow night, I want to show you a video from 1 week ago today, on March 12, prepared by the BBC, that shows how New York City emergency crews were responding to reports of an explosion and a building collapse in New York. And by showing you this, what you're going to see from a man's description and the video that you'll see, you'll see some devastation when and this is just one building that blew up in New York. They're not sure why yet, but they believe it may have been because of some gas leaks and gas pipes. But this video will show you a man who was on a bus near the scene who heard the massive explosion that shook the bus he was on. Shane Kennedy told BBC News that the air was thick with smoke and ash, and he saw debris flying everywhere.
I was on a bus driving west on 116th Street underneath that train overpass, and there's just a massive explosion. I was facing north. The explosion was on the north side of the street. I shook the bus. There was debris flying everywhere, and we tried. The air was completely filled with smoke and couldn't see a thing. The bus driver drove straight ahead, parked in the middle of the street so we could all get off the bus, and then we basically dispersed from there. Everybody was very frazzled. Nobody really knew what was going on or what caused it. It was just, it came out of nowhere, loud explosion. And then, by the time the fire department and the police started to arrive, they were pushing everyone off the street and telling them to get back a few blocks. But the air was completely filled with smoke and ash, and the explosion itself shattered the windows of the building across the street, so it must have been pretty powerful.
Okay, and friends, that's just one building that happened to blow up because of the experts are believing it was because of some gas leaks. But can you imagine when enemies of the United States, terrorists, make bombs and strategically blow up whole cities is the plan. I'll have some news on that for you tomorrow night. I've got one that relates to, we're having more and more incidents as God pulls his hands of protection off of the people of the countries of Joseph, both the United States and the UK, the children, the sons of Joseph being Ephraim, the UK, and Manasseh, the United States, because of God's promises in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 that say, I will bless you as an individual and collectively as a nation based on whether you obey me or not. I'll give you blessings if you obey, but on the other hand, cursings if you don't obey. And some of the blessings are, one of you will chase 100, you'll chase off your enemies, you'll be the head, not the tail, the lender, not the borrower, if you obey me. Blessings. And blessings of rain and agricultural blessings. And on the other hand, just the opposite. If you don't obey me, you'll be the tail, not the head. You'll be the borrower, not the lender. What's happening to the United States today, friends? Is it a borrower or a lender? Well, it's greatly in debt. It's a great borrower. So we're under a curse. And when we go to the oceans, we hear now of sharks attacking people. And I've got a video produced by the BBC that shows an American chemist who says he's found several substances that can repel sharks. Now, you may want to pay attention to this. This might be good if you can find out what those substances are and have some of them sewn into your bathing suit, maybe. Sharks possess electrical sensors called ampullae of Lorenzina that look like tiny little freckles on their snouts. biologists believe sharks use these sensors to detect the heartbeats of their prey and to navigate using the Earth's magnetic field. In 2004, Eric Stroud found that magnets repel sharks, possibly by overwhelming their electrical sensors, and now he says his team has found that some rare earth metals appear to have the same effect. Eric Stroud and a colleague demonstrated the effect of magnetized rare earth metal on a lemon shark they had just caught off the Bahamas.
These are dip nets to capture a juvenile lemon shark that's swimming around our pen right now. TJ, go for it.
So he's just flipped the shark upside down.
And you have to wait. You got to wrestle the shark just a little bit. He's got a good grip on it behind the pec fins, like that. It's going to go into a sleep-like state. We call it tonic immobility, until you introduce some negative stimulus. I'll hold the blinder about here. I'll put the metal in about 60 centimeters away, and I'm coming up towards the nose now. Let's see.
Bends away again.
There's the bend and the rousing. That's what we look for. And then right back to normal and swims away.
Okay, friends, maybe that'll be helpful to some of you. Well, thank you for joining me. That's it for our Wednesday night report. We had a couple of lighter stories tonight, friends. Since the news is heading so strongly toward the potential of world war, which means, let's take a look at our chart before we sign off, which means the fifth seal of Revelation 6, the great seal that depicts the great tribulation, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as a time of martyrdom of saints. And as you read Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Revelation 13, Revelation 17, the whole book of Revelation, we find that this time of great tribulation is the time of Jacob's trouble, as Christ described it in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. A time of such trouble that there's never before been a time so troublesome as this will be, and a time so troublesome that never again after it will there ever again be a time of such trouble. It's called the time of Jacob's trouble, the time of trouble upon the United States, a time of trouble upon the United Kingdom, a time of trouble upon the other nations around the world, including Israel, Judah, that are part of the sons, the tribes of Israel. The Great Tribulation, a time of World War III, a time when an emperor is crowned in Frankfurt, Germany, who will revive the old Holy Roman Empire. 5 nations from the east, 5 nations from the west will give their power to him. The Bible calls that emperor a beast. Prophetically, he's called a beast. Again, it'll be a time of great martyrdom of saints, the time of Jacob's trouble, World War III, and a time that you can escape. We'll talk more about that in future programs. We're out of time for tonight. Thank you for joining me, friends, for this Wednesday night edition of Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday night, for our regular half-hour edition of the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, friends, your host Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.